Welcome to the Infinite Jungle, the podcast about the evolution of Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine Kim, and today we're going to be talking about All Core Developers Execution Call 192. It was an extremely spicy call. I have a lot to say about it. It's safe to say that negotiations for the next Ethereum upgrade, Pectra, are at a standstill, an impasse, if you will. And DevNet 1 is still not live, though developers are hoping to launch it next week. Before we get started with the show, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Welcome back to the show. I will note that most of my notes for today's episode, to keep me on track and to keep my rambling to a minimal, are on my phone. There is this crazy outage of Microsoft, I think, or Windows devices happening right now. And I wasn't able to print out the notes that I need for today's show, so you will occasionally see me looking at the phone today. But I will say, if you do want to read the full summary of the call, as per usual, please do check out the call write-up that I have linked in the show notes. We have it linked every time we do this show, and every time it's about a dev call summary, because one of the things I want to really make sure with these episodes where it's just me talking is giving some insight, giving some takes on what was discussed on the call, not just summarizing what happened on the call. And this particular call, ACDE 192, there was a ton of discussion that happened on the call. Many developers were sharing their thoughts aggressively, but there really wasn't many decisions made on the call. There wasn't any progress, movement, kind of, things changing from the state that the Pectra upgrade was in from the prior call. So in that sense, it was both a very uneventful call, but also a call that I think showed a lot of the internal division and the internal divides between protocol developers about what they think Ethereum should be and where Ethereum's competitive edge lies. So a whole lot of discussion, but not a lot of progress made on the call, ACDE 192. People are still not very happy with the design of EIP 7702. We had talked on prior episodes of this show about whether or not developers would reach an agreement on what the design of EIP 7702 should be, specifically what kind of revocation mechanism there should be for users that are interacting with more flexible EOAs, smart contract accounts. But, after giving those authorizations to submit transactions via a smart contract account, the design in which those authorizations can be revoked or not, should it be revocable within the same transaction, or in the case of the design where it is now, those revocations can't happen in the same transaction. You'd have to do it at a later point. There was discussion about that, additional discussion about that on the latest developer call, but again, no progress. And the takeaway there was that developers should continue to just simply discuss it and try and reach a resolution, as they have been trying to do for the past couple weeks. On the topic of EOF, no surprise, we've talked about it on the show again. EOF is a bundle of code changes trying to improve the functionality of the Ethereum virtual machine, basically the part of Ethereum that allows the execution of code of arbitrary complexity, the EVM, the heart of Ethereum. We had talked developers, the Geth developers particularly. Geth is the most popular, the most widely run software client for Ethereum, and Geth developers have not been shy about expressing their concerns about EOF, their concerns about including these many code changes into the upgrade, concerns about the riskiness of implementing such a large change to the EVM. Again, those discussions were had on ACDE 192, But again, there was no resolution. I mean, Geth developers still don't want it in the upgrade, and the EOF is still for now in the upgrade. But developers have said, look, let's revisit this topic again in a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, to see whether or not EOF stays into the upgrade. So really, no movement there since EOF was included into the upgrade. Geth developers are still unpleased about that, but other client teams, including Geth, continue to implement it and continue to test it. But there was still quite a bit of discussion on the call that we're going to get into that illuminated a little bit more about the thinking of developers when they're thinking about the future of Ethereum. That should inform, or at least help inform, the reasons why I think this upgrade is turning out to be the largest in Ethereum's history, and also perhaps the one, at least in my view, that has been the most contentious for a while. Of course, Ethereum has had several contentious forks before. The DAO hack is a pretty major one that resulted in a chain split. But I think the Pectra upgrade and the way that the governance process has been ongoing for Pectra, it's one of the most drawn out processes from what I can recollect for the past 6 years that I've been covering Ethereum upgrades. So anyways, on the topic of EIP 7702, it's still basically the same. EOF continues to be in Pectra, but also there continues to be quite a bit of dissent from Geth developers on that decision. Developers are also still evaluating whether or not they should be packing in more code changes to this already extremely large fork. Various developers on the calls over the past couple weeks have been saying we should really, stop including more, especially I think representatives from the testing team, from the Ethereum Foundation, developer operations team have been saying, Pectra in its current scope is already large enough as it is. We should really stop including more things. But lo and behold, almost on every call for the past couple of weeks, there are code changes that are being proposed for inclusion in Pectra. And this latest call was no different. And the reaction from developers, I think on ACDE 192 was a little bit more snarky this time of, oh, look, here's another EIP that we should potentially include in Pectra. And aside from that, developers, as I said at the top of the episode, are continuing to work on the launch of DevNet 1. We've been waiting for my listeners on the show, but developers say that they should be ready to launch it with all client pairs by Thursday, Thursday this week, by the time this episode goes out. So we shall see. I'll have another episode out the following week to follow up on whether or not we see DevNet 1 launch. But it's clear that despite the lack of progress on these items that I just said, there's increasing tension and there's increasing, I think, emotions at the lack of progress that developers are seeing on all of these fronts. And it's clear that more developers are getting frustrated at the fact that there doesn't seem to be a clear resolution to many of these topics, and a lot of the times the conclusion from the call is we will rediscuss it, or we will take this up again in a couple weeks, in a couple months, and instead of really breaking down or making a clear decision about what the underlying issue here is, and primarily the issue, I think, of certain developers that think Ethereum should be and continue to press in on its role as a smart contract platform, as a general purpose blockchain, versus developers that believe that Ethereum should be a data availability layer, a settlement layer for rollups. And that divide, I think, is really causing a lot of this disagreement. Developers that are pushing for code changes like EOF, pushing for code changes that make the user experience on Ethereum a lot that improve the user experience on Ethereum in major ways, in more complex ways, in ways that will change the Ethereum protocol in more major ways. I think these developers still believe that Ethereum should be worked on as a smart contract platform, and there should be improvements made to it, whereas other developers think it's time that Ethereum start focusing more on becoming a performance settlement layer for rollups and abandoning many initiatives that would have improved the user experience on Ethereum, because the idea is that users will now move to rollups, to layer 2s. There's also a divide of the timing question of Ethereum is the world's most adopted, most popular general purpose blockchain. It is the blockchain, whether or not developers want Ethereum to be something else. Ethereum today is the largest general purpose blockchain in the world, by value, by adoption, by name. I guess it's the oldest, and there is this divide and this disagreement on whether or not Ethereum still has the window in which to make these changes on its protocol, for example, EOF, enhancements to the EVM, and see the ramifications of all these improvements to smart contract functionality on Ethereum be replicated by rollups built on top of Ethereum, to see the ripple effects of every decision that protocol developers make on enhancing the EVM and the user experience on Ethereum be more widely adopted, widely seen across different EVM-compatible rollups that are built on Ethereum. Whereas there are other developers that are quite adamant that it is now time for Ethereum not to drive innovation in smart contract execution anymore, but to be the protocol that is the settlement layer and allow that type of innovation to happen outside of Ethereum's purview, for that kind of innovation to be led by the roll-up development teams. And so I think there's quite a bit of disagreement on both of those views of what is the phase that Ethereum is in right now. What is the priority for Ethereum to lean into right now? What is Ethereum trying to be? Where is Ethereum heading? And that is really the underlying disagreement that is fueling, I think, the continued lack of consensus about topics like EOF, EIP 7702, whether or not there should be additional code changes added into Pectra or not. I think getting on the same page about what Ethereum should be and its competitive edge right now is going to do wonders for finally breaking through this impasse, for finally being able to move forward on certain negotiations when it comes to the Pectra upgrade and gain some clarity about what the heck the Pectra upgrade is trying to do, what the major impact of Pectra should be on the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think it'll give Ethereum core developers quite a lot of cohesion to work towards a vision of Ethereum together with more unity. But I think that phase in which developers could have coalesced around a single roadmap, around a single vision for what Ethereum should be, I actually think that time has passed. It ended when Ethereum became a proof-of-stake blockchain. When Ethereum first launched, it had a 4-phase development roadmap that all Ethereum founders agreed on, that the ecosystem, as small as it was at the time, understood, digested. It was, I'm going to say the phases out of order, but there was like Homestead, Metropolis, something else. And Serenity was the last phase, okay? And that was the transition to proof of stake. And all those phases were intended to make Ethereum a performant general purpose blockchain, to make Ethereum the world's computer, the world's decentralized Web3 computer. And to some extent, I think you can argue, despite the fact that the crypto industry remains small, still in the early days of maturation and adoption globally, in this small industry that we have, Ethereum is the largest general purpose blockchain. It has achieved that vision to some extent, and it did achieve the final phase of what it promised to its users and its investors, which is its transition to proof of stake. Very delayed, it took longer than expected, but Ethereum got there. And this new roadmap, this new development phase that Ethereum is in, not all developers are aligned about what it should be and what it's supposed to be. Vitalik, of course, has put out a new roadmap for Ethereum. Some of our listeners may have seen it. It's not really a roadmap. It's got several phases that are all happening in parallel, but it rhymes. The parts of Ethereum that Vitalik had talked about wanting to improve, it's like the verge, the splurge, the purge, the courage. Courage is not even a word. But, it's that there is that roadmap. But the Ethereum ecosystem is so large, and I think there's and it's clear, at least from ACDE 192, that not all developers are on board with that vision. And I think that is what's causing the continued, I think, dissent on these calls for some of the decisions that have been made on prior calls. The decision to include EOF and Pectra, the decision to have the design of EIP 7702 in the way that it is included on DevNet 0. The decision that developers I had thought agreed in a couple calls ago that they would close the door to any more additions to EIPs. There's just continued challenges to these decisions. And that's because developers are not on the same page about what Ethereum is trying to do here. And so here's what I'm going to do. I just realized, actually, I'm going to make sure that I don't rant on for too long. I want to note a couple of key quotes and key moments in the call that happened that I think are very important to everything that I just said. They're also actually quite entertaining. This first quote that I'll share made me laugh out loud, which doesn't happen often on these highly technical developer calls. But it made me laugh out loud because it was so funny. One of the core disagreements that was brought up again on this call was on the inclusion of EOF on Pectra. And one of the Geth developers, Marius, said, quote, "I would like to make it very clear that I'm not for this change. I think it's risky, and I think the risks outweigh the benefits. And if we decide to do it, then I don't want to be held responsible for anything. If we decide to do it, I will provide the code for Geth, but I don't want to be involved in anything. If anything breaks, if Mainnet goes to shit, I have a clear conscience." End quote. And Marius actually reiterated these words again later in the call. He was like, I just want to stop talking about this now. It's clear, I'm not going to be able to change the decision, but if anything goes wrong, maybe it won't go wrong. Don't call me. I'm not going to be there to help everyone out if, the inclusion of this EOF turns out that it creates very negative, unforeseen bugs and issues on mainnet Ethereum. And, Marius, let's be real. He's a guy that loves Ethereum, that has been working on Ethereum for quite a bit. And I don't think that he's actually going to just be hands off if mainnet goes to shit. Marius, I would hope, in such a critical scenario, and as a Geth developer, he'll step in to do something or to help out in some way. But his sentiment on the call, I think, is one of exasperation. It's one of frustration that he's trying to highlight the very real concerns and the very real risks that EOF presents, and the amount of effort that it's going to take to really test properly. And because of that, I think one of his other teammates extended what Marius was saying and brought it into a different angle. And the angle that incorporates what we were talking about of what is Ethereum trying to be? This colleague, he goes by the pseudonym Light Client. He said, quote, "I think L1 Ethereum should be as simple as possible, and EOF is not compatible with that," end quote. And he later on went on to say, Light Client, he went on to say, "I would rather us focus at L1 on doing things that are necessary to the survival of Ethereum, like reducing the size of L1 clients, making it easier for people to run L1 clients. We, as a core developer group, said that we want to focus on being a settlement layer and allowing L2s to take the baton on developing execution layer for Ethereum. Yet we are trying to essentially plan the future for them. I don't think that's our place. I don't think that's useful for Ethereum." And Light Client had a really kind of funny comment in the chat where he was like, basically, I can't remember it word for word, but he said basically, these L2s have millions of dollars in VC funding. They have the chops to be able to do an upgrade like EOF and to ship it to their users. It's not something that Ethereum, if it's trying to be a settlement layer, a data availability layer for rollups, should really focus on enhancing its transaction execution functionality. These L2s, they can take care of that on their own. And this argument that, if we do EOF on the L1, then it's going to have all these ripple effects on L2s. Ethereum should just take a step back. It should start focusing on being a settlement layer and leave those innovations to the L2s like developers want it to be in a roll-up-centric future. And one of the things that I immediately did kind of after the call was start reaching out to L2s of what they thought of EOF and their thoughts on its inclusion. Will it be a big unlock for the users on their end? And lo and behold, I think L2s were quite indifferent about the EOF proposal. L2s are clearly focusing on a lot of other priorities. L2s themselves still have quite a bit of technological hurdles to securing user transactions, to improving the user experience outside of the virtual machine, outside of smart contract code development. I think roll-ups are such a nascent technology that there is quite a lot of breakthroughs that still need to happen as it relates to roll-up proving mechanisms, bridging, interoperability, and so from the perspective of roll-ups, I think that there wasn't that that much desire or at least push for EOF. There was another code change for a precompile, some new cryptographic curve, signature curve that the developer, that one of that many rollups have already actually implemented, and that has been the first kind of improvement to all EVM compatible rollups that has been put through the roll-up improvement process, the RIP process. It was raised as, look, roll-ups have implemented this. Implementing it on the layer 1 would be the next step for this code change. And developers, again, were a little bit hesitant, as I said, about including more into the Pectra upgrade. But there seemed to be a little bit more, I think, support for the adoption of something like that RIP, something like that new signature scheme that rollups have already adopted, then I would say potentially for EOF, at least from the rollups that I had been speaking to, it didn't seem like EOF was the big priority. And I think it also makes sense because one of the main priorities, I'm sure, for rollups is to see pure DAS get into Ethereum and to see fees on Ethereum for rollups go down. That would, I think, be a major unlock for the operational costs of rollups, and of course, pure DAS is going into the upgrade, going into Pectra. But to that end, I think that one of the core parts of that discussion for EOF, and really on this episode, I just want to focus on what developers had discussed when it comes to EOF because it was the largest part of the call. There was some interesting discussions around EIP 7702 and a few other code changes. But really, as it relates to EOF, there's that concern that Marius had brought up about risk. But there's also a clear understanding that the risk is something that developers will be able to manage, that developers will be able to test for, so long as they have the resources and the time to do this right, to do EOF right. And Light Client's point is whether or not the time and the resources spent to do EOF right in a safe manner is worth it if Ethereum is trying to be a settlement layer. And if the timing for all of this, if Ethereum's competitive edge is not in being a smart contract layer, is not in leading innovation for other smart contract platforms like, Arbitrum, Optimism, the other major rollups, if that's not Ethereum's role, and if developers can agree that Ethereum, it's time for all these very well-funded rollups to take that innovation and run with it, then Ethereum developers, protocol developers, should focus on doing other things. And that really, I think, was at the crux of what developers were really arguing and disagreeing about. And one other kind of interesting part of the call, or funny but also kind of sad parts of the call that I will note, is one of the developers shared, because he wanted to express his support for EOF. And I've heard this guy on the call for several years now, ever since I started covering Ethereum in 2018. I've heard Greg Colvin talk on the call. I'm not exactly sure what Greg Colvin does, but he's been a contributor to the Ethereum core development, to Ethereum protocol development for years, possibly since as early as Ethereum has launched, though I'm not 100% sure about that. But he was expressing on the call that he's been working to get certain aspects of EOF into Ethereum for 9 years. And he kept repeating that. I've been trying to get this into Ethereum for 9 years. And on one hand, it's a little bit sad because when Ethereum first launched, it was trying to be an extremely performant and scalable smart contract platform. That is the vision that this developer, of course, has spent most of his years building for and working towards. But over the past, year or so, I guess ever since rollups became a thing. I mean, rollups have been a thing for a while, but ever since more Ethereum developers have given up on the vision of sharding and have come around to this idea of scaling Ethereum through layer 2 rollups and through achieving the blockchain modularity thesis, there are developers like Greg that clearly do have to give up on work that they've been working on for close to a decade. And these kinds of developers are not going to give up on that vision easily. They've been at it for so many years. And I don't think that all developers, like I said earlier on in this show, are on board with giving up on Ethereum as a smart contract platform, and perhaps rightly so. To be clear, Ethereum is not a performance settlement layer. Ethereum is not competitive as a DA layer today. It does have the benefits or the advantages of being the most decentralized, but its core advantage and what has brought Ethereum so much value is its network effects, it is its EVM, it is Ethereum as a general purpose blockchain. So on one hand, it's sad. It's a little bit sad. But on the other hand, for developers that have been following along and really giving up their time, resources, their emotions, their mental energy to Ethereum for years, it should also be apparent by now that for Ethereum, there are no sacred cows. For Ethereum, there is no aspect of the protocol, no aspect of Ethereum's vision that can't change drastically over the next year or the next couple months. I think Ethereum, time and time again, has shown that the monetary policy of Ethereum, the core consensus of Ethereum, the user experience of Ethereum can change in one upgrade. And developers are not afraid of tinkering and trying to advance Ethereum in the most cutting-edge way possible by pursuing upgrades that involve very cutting-edge technology and that make bets on very risky, I would say, and unproven theses, like the modularity thesis. This is something that developers are betting on, and that I think it follows along with what Ethereum has done for most of its history. And because of the fact that Ethereum continues to evolve and there are no sacred cows on Ethereum, there are certain developers that have, just kind of thrown up their hands and said, well, I don't think Ethereum is going in the direction that I thought it would and that I thought it should go in. Let's go, build on another alternative L1. And that has happened before. The reason why I think we've seen, the likes of Polkadot, the likes of, what are some of the other ones? Near, maybe Solana to some extent, is, there's developers that see what Ethereum is doing or have contributed to Ethereum and have been burned, have seen ideas that that Ethereum developers have given up on, and they don't agree with the direction. So, yeah. So, I mean, we see a lot of changes that have happened in the Ethereum ecosystem. So on one hand, I feel for developers like Greg that have worked so long on Ethereum, and suddenly the direction and the vision of Ethereum is changing. And some developers might argue it wasn't suddenly, it happened over a very long time. But I think, the roll-up model is still fairly new to pivot the development and the vision for an entire blockchain of Ethereum size. But on the other hand, I think it was also inevitable. I think that when you build on Ethereum, you can't expect your business model not to change in drastic ways every 6 months. And you can't expect the work that you do, even as an Ethereum researcher or protocol developer, not to change in major ways in 6 months. That's going to happen. That's what's always been happening on Ethereum. That's probably the only value of Ethereum that you can really rely on to not change. That Ethereum will constantly be changing. It is the constantly evolving, I would say, blockchain. So in conclusion, from all of this ranting and this very long drawn out thoughts on what I was thinking about when I was listening to ACDE 192, and a lot of which, I was laughing on certain bits because developers were really getting snarky. Some of the memes that they were sharing in the chat was also kind of hilarious. Ethereum developers, a lot of them have a good sense of humor. I think it's clear that there is a divide between developers of, do we really commit to the roll-up-centric roadmap or do we not? And as a final note, I think for the developers that are very strongly in favor of removing EOF from Pectra, and for primarily to get developers, I think one question is that I want to ask in terms of, the logical conclusion of all this is Ethereum supposed to change and supposed to behave in such a way that it caters strictly to the needs of rollups? That, I think, is one of the realities of a rollup-centric future, that Ethereum doesn't do what's best for its end users, because end users will primarily be serviced by rollups, and it's up to rollups to service these end users well. But Ethereum, in a roll-up-centric future, it becomes the blockchain that services rollups the best. And to that end, the code changes that developers then need to prioritize are not code changes like EOF, EIP 7702. It's PeerDAS. It's the rollup, the RIP rollup that was presented on the latest dev call. It's whatever the heck rollups want and ask for. I think if Ethereum is very serious about becoming a settlement layer, Ethereum has to take the back seat in terms of participating in discussions about what will make the user experience better on Ethereum, and also what will make the user experience better on rollups. And I think that's a very risky call to make. I think if developers are serious about the logical conclusion of what a rollup-centric roadmap means for Ethereum today, it means giving up on a lot of what has made Ethereum successful today, a lot of what has made Ethereum what it is. And I really think that moving forward, we're going to see more confusion. We're going to see more difficulty, especially around the Pectra upgrade and figuring out the next steps for Pectra. Until there's a clear resolution to the vision for Ethereum among protocol developers, I think it's still troubling times ahead for the Pectra upgrade. So thank you, everyone, for listening to the show this week. And thank you, as always, for sharing the show, liking the show. I hope that you learned something new about Ethereum. For people that are watching on YouTube, as you can see, I am finally back in New York. It feels good to be back. So I'm signing off from New York. I will be back again next week with another episode. As always, in your explorations of the ever-evolving ecosystem that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.